Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on Veeam Cloud Tier Best Practices, how you can cut your data storage cost up to 80%. This webinar has been made possible through the partnership of Veeam, Wasabi, and Probax. Our speakers today are Dustin Alberton, Senior Cloud Architect with the Global Alliance Architecture team at Veeam, Jim Donovan, Senior Vice President of Product at Wasabi, and Kevin Allen, Founder and CTO of Probax. Before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping items. First, this webinar is being recorded. The slides and the recording will be available to all attendees early next week. Second, we'll have a question and answer session at the end. So if you have a question, please type it in the chat section. And third, we're going to keep it fun and interesting with poll questions in between speakers. So please cast your vote when the time comes. Dustin, over to you.
Thank you, Kira. So thank you, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. This webinar today, we're going to go through kind of three acts. The first act is going to be talking about what is Cloud Tier, a brief deep dive, I would say, on what makes it different than other products out there. And then the second act will be talking about Wasabi and how Veeam can partner with Wasabi to leverage Cloud Tier in a much more efficient manner, much more productive manner. As well as the cost savings on top of that. And then the third act will be talking about how Probax is leveraging both products to make an offering and how they're helping customers and end users. So let's just dive right in. We'll have a quick overview of what it is, what makes it different, and then how you can leverage it. So the basic architecture for Veeam Cloud Tier is part of the scale-out backup repository. And what it is a tiering mechanism to tier your on-premises backups off automatically to an S3 or S3 compatible object storage vendor, whether that be on-premises or in this instance, we're referring to Wasabi. And each of them have plus or minuses, but Wasabi is one of our chosen partners, I would say, because of as we'll get into it, because of API calls that are just done natively on object storage. This is where Wasabi shines, is their performance and the cost associated with it. Especially when it comes to API calls, there are no costs associated with it. So again, it's a built-in mechanism in Veeam that scales your backups from on-premises into object for longer-term retention. There's some required components of it that are necessary to understand. So since it's a portion of the scale-out backup repository, there's some components that you'll need. One, of course, is a Veeam backup replication server. Two is the correct license so that you can leverage the scale-out backup repository, and that license is going to be an Enterprise or Enterprise Plus license. The difference between the two is Enterprise, you're allowed a scale-out backup repository up to 3 extents, and then a Enterprise Plus scale-out backup repository, you can have unlimited extents. What counts as an extent is any repository. So if you have 2 on-premises repositories and an object storage repo, that's 3 extents. So, and then of course you need some storage on-prem for the initial backup, and then you need an object storage repo for the tiering job to happen. So, what makes this different? What is the difference, other than some of the other backup products out there that just write off to S3? So what we're doing differently is when we back up or when we tier off one of our backups, we're keeping a shell of that backup in object storage, and we're keeping a shell of it on-prem. And when I say a shell of it, it's a very small file, and it contains metadata or it contains pointers to where that backup resides on object storage. The reason we do that is because it's a local cache. So when you're doing these restorations or you're doing rehydration back down to on-premises, you need to be able to know where that data is and reduce the amount of API calls you're making, reduce the amount of storage calls, the data that you're bringing back out. because it helps with performance and speed of restorations and things like that. It also helps with the movement of data, because if sometimes when we move a backup into object, some of those blocks are still existing in other backups that are on premises. So what we'll do is we'll leverage some of those blocks that are already there, pull the blocks that we need out of object, and perform whatever restoration you're trying to do. The second time is, again, the offloaded backup remains in the performance tier, so that little shell remains on-prem. And like I just said, it's reducing that the I/O charges, or the in Wasabi's instance, it's just making the performance better, because you're only pulling back what you need. You're not going there pulling back terabytes of information when you only need, maybe a few blocks to restore a file or whatever type of job you're trying to do. And again, with this, whether it's in object or whether it's on-prem, all of the Veeam functionalities just work. You can still do your instant recoveries. You can still do your file level, entire computer, disk level restores, item level restores. You can leverage your explorers. You can do everything that you're familiar with already within Veeam. And again, that intelligent block recovery, that's what I was just referring to. It's the process of just restoring just the blocks that's needed, and no more, no less. Again, it makes it much more faster to do these restorations, as well as facilitate the movement of data. So let's take a look at what I mean by when we keep a metadata file. So this is a very simple diagram of a Veeam backup that's on premises. You see the metadata, and then there's data chunks that's inside of a VBK. And a VBK is a Veeam full backup file. So what happens when we mark it as it can be tiered off is the data, the metadata is going to be moved into a bucket or a folder within a bucket on object storage. And then we're going to move the blocks over. And then we're going to compress that VBK file on-prem and keep the metadata in it as well. So this is really cool, because if something were to happen to your on-prem, heaven forbid there's a disaster or whatever, and your on-prem site goes down completely, you can just set up a new Veeam server, connect it to that object storage bucket. It's going to read that metadata and tell what backups are up there, and then say, okay, you can restore these. So it helps with that kind of disaster situation that none of us really want to have. So now that we've talked about what it is and how it gets moved, how does that data get marked for being offloaded? So there's two conditions that need to be met. One is it has to be outside of an operational restore window. What that means is when you are setting up your scale-out backup repository, there's a setting in there that you can say, after 7 days, after 8 days, after 10 days, whatever amount of days you want to put it, I want to mark these backups as they could be tiered off to object storage. And then the second condition of that is that the backup chain has to be sealed. So we'll go through a diagram here in a second that kind of helps you understand what a sealed backup chain is. But the easiest way to understand it, the default backup chain style for Veeam is going to be a forever forward incremental. And the backup chain is sealed when another full backup is taken. So anything older than your latest full backup is a closed backup chain, and that could be tiered off to object. So the offload process, how does it happen? Is it automatic? Yes, it's automatic. There's the backup data is collected via an agent job that runs. That Veeam agent.exe is scheduled to run every 4 hours by default. And it's a process that just runs automatically in the background. So every 4 hours, this kicks off the process. It runs a scan of the scale-out backup repository. It says, is anything marked as it could be tiered? And if there is, it says, okay, I'm going to run a tiering job, and it tiers that data off automatically. You can also run this process manually. You can do it via a PowerShell command, or you can do it via the console with a right-click command on the scale-out backup repository. So I spoke a minute ago of moving. This is part of the setup of it. So this is when you're setting up a scale-out backup repository. Here's the checkbox that you can do to say, okay, I want to extend it or move this data off to object storage. And then you can say, okay, I want to, anything older than 30 days or anything under 30 days or under 7 days or whatever. Okay, so this is a good slide to understand what is a sealed backup chain. So in this instance, if we look at a week's worth of backups here, the very first one is a full, and then we have incrementals on Tuesday through Sunday, and then Monday, another full backup is taken. So in this instance, anything older than that Monday's backup is marked as it could be tiered off. And for a reverse incremental, it's slightly different. So a reverse incremental is anything older than the full backup and 2 incrementals is marked as it could be tiered off. And then with backup copy jobs, it kind of follows the same thing. So if you look at this instance here, you'll see that the Monday job, or there's a full backup, and then all the ones previous or after that, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, so forth, are incrementals. But anything previous to that latest full backup is marked as it could be tiered off. So you see the yearly, the quarterly, the monthly, and the weekly full were all marked as they could be tiered off. So let's look at a brief kind of diagram of in this image here, you can see that on Saturday there was a full backup taken, and then Sunday, Monday we have some incrementals that are taken. So on Saturday, once that full backup is taken, 4 hours after that full backup completes, it'd be marked as, okay, anything older could be tiered off to object storage. So what would happen is that full backup would get moved, the incrementals would get moved, and all those data that resides on it would get tiered off over into the capacity tier, or the cloud tiers, or is the marketing name for it. And this is a pretty handy diagram to show some of the space savings features that we're doing. So if you look at this, it may look a little complicated, but you can see here that the full backup file that we have here has an A, B, and a C block of data in it. The incremental here happens to have the A, B, and D block. When we tier that off to object, what we're going to do is we're going to put pointers to blocks that already reside there. So that first full backup gets moved up there. You see it has the pointers for the A, B, and C blocks. So instead of duplicating those blocks when we move the incremental file up there, we're just going to point to the data blocks that are already there, and we're just going to move that D block. So the only new block that was moved was the D block, but we're using pointers to the other blocks that already reside there, thereby saving space and increasing performance and things like that. So the same thing happens when we are doing a restoration. So when we're restoring that data back to on-premises, or bringing that backup back on-prem for maybe testing or restoration process, we're going to leverage the blocks that are already there. So you'll see that the A block is already there, the B block is already there, but we are going to need to pull that C block back down. So we're only pulling that one block back down, rehydrating that BPK file, and now it resides on-prem. And the same process again for a restoration. So in this instance, we're going to restore a file back to on-premises, and you can see that we're leveraging blocks already there, and then we're just pulling the C block out of object storage and issuing it to the restore target. And then briefly, this is a handy slide. I actually really like this slide. So this slide is showing what it looks like when we move it to object storage. So typically, if you're familiar with Veeam, in a repo, you see VBKs, you see VIBs. VBK is a full backup file, a VIB is an incremental file. But when we're tiering this off to object, you see that we use like a folder structure here. But the main thing to know here is that we're separating both the data, the metadata file, and the data. So we're separating those again to facilitate with safety, being able to have connect directly to this and pull that data down in the event of a disaster, and as well as mobility of that data, so we can move that within buckets and things like that. And then lastly, this again is a high-level overview of what the architecture looks like. So now that we've gone through, a brief overview of what Cloud Tier is, we're going to have a poll here and discuss which, I'm going to ask a question here. So which license edition has the scale-up backup repository included in it, and the Cloud Tier can connect to it? So which editions, I'm going to launch this real quick. So which edition of Veeam do you need to be on to be able to leverage Cloud Tier? Give that a second, and once that is complete, I will hand it over to you, Jim, and then you can talk about how Wasabi and Veeam together are a good partner. So I'll give it one more second here, and then I'll close the poll, and then I'll pass control over to you. All right, that looks good. So I'll hand it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dustin. My name is Jim Dunneman. I run the product team here at Wasabi, and we're grateful for our hosts today from Veeam for the excellent partnership we've had over the past year or so in putting this audience together for us. So Dustin provided a lot of good background about how the Cloud Tier works within the context of Veeam. And so we're going to kind of expand upon that by talking a bit about Cloud Tier with Wasabi and how we can cut your cloud storage costs by up to 80%. So a good kind of way to kind of look at that. And Dustin, can you make sure I have control, please? Thank you. So some of the drivers for everything that Dustin was talking about is the fact that traditional public cloud storage, such as what you might get from many of the hyperscalers, can be unpredictable and have very high costs. So this poses some challenges from the perspective of small to medium businesses and enterprises often can't afford the total cost of ownership of both the Veeam and traditional public cloud storage. You have the challenge of enterprise budgets not being able to keep up with data growth. And the fact that traditional public cloud storage, they don't offer a flat fee approach. So this makes it quite a bit of a challenge from the standpoint of trying to predict what the cost of public cloud storage is going to be. And or if you want to take advantage of all the great things that Dustin was talking about, how do you do this in a predictable manner? So unless these cost challenges are addressed, then the customers may consider other alternatives, including other products and on-site storage, which is something that as we try to embrace public cloud storage, none of us really want to see happen. So if you take a look at Wasabi and the role of Wasabi, and okay, slide. So from a background perspective, the focus at Wasabi is really about providing low price, high performance, secure object storage. Our team was started 4 years ago by the founding team from Carbonite. Many of you may be familiar with that company and the role they played in consumer backup storage. We're a privately held company based in the Boston area with almost $80 million invested to date. And the product we build is cloud object storage as a service. So we are in the same category as Amazon Web Services S3, Microsoft Azure Blob Storage, and GCP Cloud Storage. We're fortunate to have over 8,000 paying customers at this point and partners across verticals in public sector, enterprise, small to medium business, as well as almost 700 managed service providers, cloud service providers that we work with today. And we're very proud to be part of the Veeam Technology Alliance program. And we were recently certified as Veeam-ready for object storage, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. So when it comes to Wasabi's focus, from a value proposition perspective, we talk about price, performance, and protection. So one of the themes of today's discussion is about how you can save up to 80% over traditional public cloud storage. And part of that comes from the fact that we don't charge for egress in terms of if you ever need to pull the data back from public cloud storage, nor do we charge for API requests. And the fact that we have a much lower cost per gigabyte or cost per terabyte relative to public cloud object storage providers certainly makes a difference. And then on the performance side of things, we've done some things in our file system and the technology that we use to power that file system that lets us be up to 6 times faster than the hyperscalers. So that's a huge improvement for a lot of backup and recovery scenarios. We also offer a number of private and public network connectivity options, which gives you very rapid upload and download access to that public cloud object storage. We'll expand on that a little bit more as we go through. And then certainly data protection. If you're considering the embrace of public cloud object storage, you want to make sure you have the appropriate redundancy capabilities in place. in public cloud object storage. There's the discussion around data durability. 11 nines of data durability is kind of the gold standard when you're talking about public cloud. And then certainly immutable storage. So in some businesses, the concept of write once or read many times, or worm storage, making sure that no one can modify either intentionally or accidentally any storage you may keep in the storage repository, is a very important feature. So let's drill down a little bit more into each of these value proposition areas. From a price perspective, our cost is exceptionally lower relative to any of the other public cloud storage providers that are out there. So we have a flat fee of 0.0059 gigabyte per month, or 599 terabyte per month for storage. So this is certainly a disruptor relative to what you might pay from any of the hyperscalers that offer public cloud object storage today. A meaningful difference is that we don't charge for egress. So if you haven't worked with public cloud object storage before, you might not be aware that anytime you pull data down from any of the offerings from the hyperscalers, you're going to have to pay up to 9 cents per gigabyte. And that can be a meaningful number if you're doing a terabyte or petabyte level restore. And then another aspect of it is that all the hyperscalers will charge you for API requests. So think of an API request as something that gets consumed every time you do a write action or a read action or a directory action against any storage you may keep. So even if you don't plan on doing a restore, because you figure, well, if I'm doing a backup scenario, then maybe I'm only going to do a restore once a year or if I ever need it. And so it might not be a meaningful number to you, but certainly API requests can be a meaningful number. So we have customers that have been working with services from the hyperscalers that, in addition to the per terabyte storage they're paying every month, they have to pay an additional 30% just in API request charges. So not only is that an offensive number, because you're not having to pay that when you're dealing with premises storage today, it's also an unpredictable number. So in some ways, it's possible to maybe size it out from a storage volume perspective, but most of us don't really have any idea how many API requests or write actions or read actions or lead actions that might take place in any given day. So it's a very much an unpredictable number and a challenge, and it's certainly one of the hallmarks of our pricing model, the fact that we don't charge for egress, we don't charge for API requests. So not only is it a low cost per terabyte from a storage cost perspective, but we don't throw in all these other junk fees that make the use of public cloud object storage expensive and unpredictable. So let's talk a little bit about the technology behind Wasabi and what we do. So let me go back one slide here. Okay, excellent, thank you. So from a performance perspective, the enabling factor for Wasabi, not only on the speed perspective, but also the price perspective, is the fact that we use our own purpose-built file system. So this is something that we wrote from scratch. It's the most important part of the intellectual property here at Wasabi. And we're really building on over a decade of experience in file systems and writing to disks in a very efficient manner that the team garnered from their Carbonite days. We also embrace a newer class of disk drive technology known as SMR, or shingled magnetic recording disk drives. So this is a technology that is heavily used by Dropbox as they move to deploy a cloud offering of themselves, a private cloud offering. So we're the #2 consumer of SMR technology next to Dropbox. So it's the combination of our file system combined with this disk drive technology that powers the cost reductions and performance improvements that we can offer. On the performance improver, just from a measurement perspective, that if you're talking about write speeds as an example relative to one of the hyperscalers, if you look on the right side of the chart, we can do almost 500 megabytes in a 5-second period relative to one of the hyperscalers being able to do less than 100 megabytes. So it's a real meaningful number when you're trying to write to public cloud object storage. It also plays out into time to first byte advantages from the standpoint of when you ask for the file, you get it back in the most rapid manner possible. We're also deployed in tier 3 and tier 4 data centers throughout the world, and Wasabi is not a white label of anyone else's storage service. So essentially, it's our software deployed on commodity hardware in top tier data centers, and we have a distributed architecture that lets us scale our head servers, which terminate the network traffic, our database servers, which handle the metadata, and our storage servers, which handle all of the objects that we're storing. So it's very much a scalable solution that can meet the growth of the small, medium business as well as the enterprise customers going forward. And moving ahead to the next chart where we talk about data protection. So this is kind of the third pillar of what we do at Wasabi from a value proposition perspective. So we talked about price, we talked about performance. On the protection side, we do handle 11 nines of data durability. So the data durability is different than system availability. So data durability is about when you send us a file, how do you ensure that we don't lose the file or damage the file? So we use an erasure coding mechanism to ensure that you're essentially making 20 copies of the data when it comes to us. And that gives you a very high degree of data protection capabilities. We also have no single point of failure within the deployment or the design or in a single data center. So that gives you system availability of 4 nines, which is the same as the hyperscalers provide. We also support a capability known as cross-region replication. So if you wish to augment our very strong redundancy within a single data center by having the public cloud copy your data to another data center, you can use this cross-region replication capability. Sometimes people ask about security in the context of encryption. So in public cloud object storage, you will typically find that the storage provider will encrypt all the data at rest, meaning when you send us an object or you send us a file, as part of it getting written to disk, it gets encrypted. So that's certainly something we do at Wasabi. All the data is also transported over HTTPS, so it's encrypted at a transport perspective. And you're also welcome to encrypt the data before you send it to public cloud object storage. So we support all the different encryption combinations that a security officer would typically require. We also apply an integrity checking function every 90 days, as well as in addition to the time of upload and the time of download. So this makes sure that essentially all the bits are in the right place, not only the time of upload or download, but also every 90 days, and we report on any errors that we might find in that context. Another dimension of protection comes into our immutability feature. So we offer a capability called immutable buckets. So think of a bucket as the top level storage container within object storage. And when you set up a bucket for immutability, you can set retention periods of a certain number of days, a certain number of months, a certain number of years. And once that's turned on, then nobody can modify or delete or rename or any way mess with the file as it's stored in that bucket. And then you can also have it set up so that after a certain period of time, the file's automatically deleted, because in some use cases, not only you want to make sure that that file is protected for the full duration of the retention period, then after a certain period of time, you want the file to be automatically deleted. So you have full control of that area at the bucket level. And then lastly, we make a big investment at Wasabi in industry-specific certifications, because we have a large number of enterprise customers amongst our 8,000 plus customers. So we've gone through formal certification with third-party auditors for healthcare. This is the HIPAA certification, CGIS for criminal justice, FERPA for higher education, GDPR for European privacy, and MPA for media and entertainment and the work we do in the Hollywood segment. And then Wasabi is deployed in top-tier data centers throughout the world, from Equinix, Digital Realty, Iron Mountain, and Flexential. So let's talk a little bit more about the data centers and how you interconnect and basically connect into Wasabi. So when you think about, we're all here because we either are currently using Veeam or planning on using Veeam. So when you think about your Veeam environment and how do you connect that Veeam environment to Wasabi? So most of our customers to date come to us over the public network. So all of our data centers have multiple 10 gig per second connectivity. It's something that we start off with a pair of 10 gig connections from redundant providers, and then we scale up that capacity as the consumption in the data center goes up. So that's certainly an option for you. There's also, in the use of public cloud, the concept of direct connect. So think of these as private network connections from your data center or your public cloud instance. So there may be cases where you're running your Veeam applications in cloud compute somewhere else. So wherever you may be running your Veeam environment, you have the option of connecting to Wasabi over a private network connection, either from the hyperscalers or from your data center at 1 or 10 gigabit per second speeds. We also do support a transfer appliance. So this is kind of the sneaker net way of moving data from A to B, because there may be scenarios where you have hundreds of terabytes that you want to move to public cloud, but you only have a 1 gigabit per second connection coming out of the place where that data lives. So transfer appliances, we have something called Wasabi Ball. Amazon has something called Snowball. It's kind of an industry accepted way of moving data from A to B. We offer it on a rental model where for $300, you get it for 2 weeks, you load it up, you send it back to Wasabi, and then we ingest it into the service that way. So it's a very good way of moving data around if you can't get the network connectivity you might need. We currently have 4 data centers, 2 in the US East region. We have 1 in the US West region. We have 1 in the European region in EU Central in Amsterdam. We plan on opening a data center in Japan by the end of the year, and we're continuing to grow our business and deploy additional data center capacity as we need to grow the business. And then just kind of continuing on here, I think it's helpful to understand the cloud tier best practice in the context of applying the 3-2-1 rule with Wasabi. So I think Dustin talked a little bit about this in his discussion. So when you think about the data source as being your VMware Hyper-V environment, it's going to come into Veeam backup and replication. It's going to pass through the performance tier, and then it's going to land on Wasabi as the capacity tier. So this is certainly, this reference architecture is what was the driver for the certification we did with the Veeam team on Veeam-ready object. As we mentioned earlier, we're a direct alternative to AWS S3, certainly much less expensive, up to 6 times faster, the same level of durability. It's configured in the same way as you configure hyperscaler connectivity. And we've also been certified not only for the Veeam-ready object, but we've also verified and documented against both Veeam Backup and Ready, or if you're also using Veeam Cloud Connect, that's a process that we've gone through as well. And just from a management console perspective, if you've worked with public cloud object storage before, we have the same type of management console. So it's something that typically what people will do is they'll use our management console to do the initial provisioning of the buckets and the identity access management capabilities. It's modeled on how it's done with AWS S3. So it's very easy to use from that perspective. And then once you have your key set and your buckets provisioned, then you handle the rest of the provisioning from the Veeam environment. And then just kind of wrap up my portion of it in terms of talking about the Veeam and Cloud Tier solution summary. Dustin talked earlier about the benefits of leveraging Cloud Tier from the unlimited Cloud Tier capacity perspective. Certainly the fact that Wasabi has taken the important step of going through the formal Veeam program around Veeam-ready certification for object storage, and certainly the disruptive price, the high performance, and the protection capabilities that we provide, we'd like to think makes a real big difference in terms of helping you achieve a significant cost reduction and cost savings when it comes to using public cloud object storage with Veeam. So at this point, one more slide, just in terms of if you want to learn a little bit more about the solution, there's a pointer to a page on our website that gives you some case studies as well as knowledge base and solution brief information. So this is a good follow-up for if you want to learn a little bit more about the Veeam and Wasabi solution. And at this point, I would like to turn back to a poll, and then we'll pass the baton to Kevin from Probax.
Thank you, Jim. So for this poll, we've got how many terabytes of data are you storing cumulatively across all of your customers? So we'll launch that poll and give you a minute or two to answer. Again, this would be a total of, it could be a guesstimation, but how much data are you currently storing in the cloud or storing on-prem or in the cloud, both across all of your customers? Give a few more seconds here. Looks like a lot of people are voting. Looks like we can share the results here real quick and briefly as well. So it looks like the majority is less than 100 terabytes. We've got about 25% between 100 and 500 terabytes. And then there's some 1 through 20 and 20 plus. So there's a good range there. So Kevin, I'll hand it over to you, and you can tell us about Probax and Veeam and Wasabi.
Great. Thanks for that, Dustin and Jim. So hi everyone, my name's Kevin Allen. I'm founder and CTO of Probax, and I'm a Veeam Vanguard. I just wanted to share a bit about how we work with Veeam and Wasabi to add value for our MSPs and their customers. So a little bit about us. I realize not many people have heard of us before. So as a quick overview, we're a multi-vendor, multi-tenant platform as a service, a data protection platform. We offer intelligent and automated cloud solutions, including backup, DR, archiving, SaaS protection, and software licensing. We started in Australia 14 years ago. We've had North American clients for about 4 years now. We just opened an office in New York City, and that's where our US team is based. That's where I'm based out of as well. We're 100% channel only. We deal with hundreds of MSPs and system integrators, and we have thousands of end users that are supported on our platform too. So we move forward from providing standard backup and DR and are providing a full data protection solution, and that's what we've built our business on. So for about the last 10 years, we've been providing advanced monitoring and automation. Lately, our focus has been on Veeam, so that's why we won the first Innovation Award in Chicago last year. We also have integrations with Dropbox, Office 365. We're always looking at and assessing new products. We've had very strong year-on-year growth. We've got a very high NPS. We're continually polling our partners from account management to service desk. All very positive responses, and we're almost 3 times the industry average there. We currently use 8 DCs around the world. We open up new locations as demand is there. It's about choosing the right location for your customers' data. We have 6 petabytes under management on our own custom backup and DR infrastructure. That's not including what we have under management locally at our MSPs and their customers, or in our Wasabi storage or AWS around the world. So looking at our product set, you can see that they're color-coded here. We can see that nearly all of them integrate with the Veeam availability platform. So control is at the center of our product set. That's our single pane of glass management console. So all your data protection requirements are controlled from here. You can activate whatever you need, wherever you need it instantly. Backup as a service, it's highly available, SSD-backed storage clusters. We always get nice and fast merges with Veeam. And we provide 2 copies of the data which are stored in our cluster, and we have a pool pricing model. So purchase a block of storage and divide that up amongst your clients however you need it. With DRAS, that's provided solely through Veeam. We do not oversubscribe our DRAS resources. And archive as a service, so I'm going to go into a little bit more about this in on one of my next slides. So that's archival storage at a fraction of the cost of backup as a service. It's completely automated with Veeam. There's minimal configuration. There's no requirements to upload additional data. It's a true air-gap solution that prevents against accidental or malicious deletions. We operate outside the Veeam processes, so backup images can't be deleted before the minimum expiry time. With Office Backup and Archive, it's a cloud-to-cloud data protection solution for Office 365 that's built on Veeam's backup for Office 365. And we do up to 6 automated daily point-in-time backups with unlimited storage and retention in AWS for a fixed cost per user. The biggest point that we have with this product is we do automated verification of every restore point. So we check what's actually been selected for backup and that it actually exists in those restore points, and we keep a full audit trail. Dropbox Backup and Archive, so that's the only product we don't use Veeam for. However, we do use Wasabi for it. And again, that's another cloud-to-cloud data protection solution for Dropbox and Dropbox for Business. Enables rapid ransomware recovery and data archiving beyond the standard Dropbox 120 days, again at a fixed cost per user. We do Veeam licensing, instant provisioning of monthly Veeam rental licenses through our control console. There's no reporting requirements, and we have heavily discounted pricing thanks to our global buying power. We continually pass on the discounts we received with the more people that use them, but if you do have your own licenses, you can keep using them, no problem at all. Managed data protection services. So this has been pretty big in the last 6 months or so. So under a traditional relationship, we provide the data protection platform, and our MSP is responsible for configuring, monitoring, and managing the end user's data protection solutions. However, we were seeing that more and more MSPs who want to offload, that they want to offload these tasks to us. So either due to lack in time, skill set, desire, or a combination of all three. So we essentially act as the backup DR, data protection department of an MSP to keep their clients protected. And we do this for a fixed cost per device so that MSPs can concentrate on other billable work. Probably my personal favorite here is Scout. So that's an application that's built by us. It's a locally installed application that provides automated verification error fixing, so you can spend less time managing backups. So basically Scout has its own database of common errors and their associated fixes, so it automatically applies them as well. As Scout comes across new errors, it learns how to fix them, and as our network of Scouts get larger, we're able to fix errors for everyone sooner. So this is a sneak peek of one of our dashboards for our new control management console for MSPs. So we've done a huge overhaul of our entire monitoring, alerting, and automation engine so that MSPs can be aware of backup and replication issues immediately. And our platform can then obviously automatically fix them up. So along with this, we do have a new version of Scout, which will be for end users as well as MSPs or VCSPs. I can't go into too much detail about that, but I urge all MSPs to get in touch with us to find out more. So why Wasabi? So we've been archiving data for many years with a lot of different products using either our own infrastructure, DGP appliances, or public cloud. We build our own products as well as integrate with other backup software, but we work mainly with Veeam products and use their APIs and PowerShell to build our solutions. As our customer base is only MSPs, we build what MSPs and VCSPs want to see. So we've used other public cloud storage in the past, but we weren't too happy with what they were offering. So since then, we've partnered with Wasabi to offer extended services in North America. So for us, it came down to predictability and compliance. So on predictability, no one likes bill shock. So for example, you might have an AWS Aurora database that uses way too many IO resources, or you have files in object storage that would download a whole lot more than you thought they would, and you've been slugged with bandwidth charges. When you look at other solutions, you see that Glacier and Azure Archive look like a good place to store long-term data, but the retrieval costs are massive, and that's what will catch you out there. Or you can go down the AWS Azure hot storage path, but the price per gig is very high, and you still have the outbound bandwidth cost there. So in terms of partnering with Wasabi, for us, it's not just the restores, but verifying the data continually without the extra outbound bandwidth cost. A couple other things that were important to us are compliance. So you need to meet your customer's SLA of what restore points they need to keep for their company or industry requirements. With Veeam's Cloud Tier, you can easily add Wasabi into your SOBA, as Wasabi is fully S3 compatible. You can let Veeam archive off the parts of your backups as it needs to, into low-cost storage like Wasabi. There's no egress charges, so you can continue to test your backups without costs like other cloud providers. For security, as Jim mentioned, data stored has security measures in place that most likely your customers will look for, like SOC 2, HIPAA, and many more. So this is something I spoke about at VeeamON in Miami last month as part of the ransomware session with Rick Vanover from Veeam and some other Veeam vanguards. So this is how we use archive storage outside of the Veeam Cloud Tier. So Honeycomb Virtual Tape Library, that's what we won Veeam's first innovation award for. And we're now able to integrate this into Wasabi storage platform for our MSPs using our storage in North America. So a couple of scenarios that we, or a couple of reasons why we built this product is we found that ransomware would get onto a network and it would delete local and cloud backup jobs, but there'd also be a delay before ransomware is executed. So even using insider protection with Veeam doesn't always help in that case. Another case, specifically with insider attacks, when a job is modified, but all but one VM is removed. So you think that the job is running through fine, but it doesn't have all the VMs that you think are there. So how it works is basically we take the GFS created archive points, we move them outside of the cloud repo, and as soon as we've done that, we disconnect from the archive storage. So it's done outside of the Veeam processor, so the local VBR has no idea where the files are kept, so it keeps it safe from insider and outsider attacks. We set the minimum expiry time, and that's different depending on the type of GFS image that's being protected. When we're restoring, we copy the data out, we leave the original still in Honeycomb so that you can continue to meet the SLA for your clients. And we continually re-verify the data. So Wasabi is a great fit here, as we're able to continually verify the backups without us needing to wear any of the egress cost. So we can pass on these cost savings to our MSPs. So that's the end of my slides here. And here's a few ways you can get in touch with us and test out what we have, find out some more info on how we help our MSPs and their clients.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And we've got one last poll here. Let me switch to that slide. And the question is, when working with a cloud backup and data protection provider, what are you most influenced by? So let me go ahead and launch that poll. And while we wait for those polls to come in, after that, I'll hand it over to Carol and we'll go through some Q&A. So we'll give it a few more seconds here. Looks like people are still voting. And I'll share those the results with everybody here so we can just see what is important. All right, got a couple more. And here we go. So let's share that real quick. And you can see Kevin and team what's important to people as they're looking at a cloud backup or a data protection provider. By far, it looks like the central management console, and then second, to that would be the DC locations and the speed. So, but it is a pretty even sweep there across most of that. All right, so I'll hand it over to Kara, and we'll go through some questions. And as Kara mentioned at the beginning, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat window, and we'll get to them.
Thank you, Dustin. Great job, fellas. Appreciate all the shares. So one of our first questions, Dustin, is for you. And this comes from Christian Gomez. The DR situation, can we restore into the cloud? If the local NAS has been damaged, how we restore the most current backup if, let's say, we're keeping on site the latest 30 days worth of backups and offloading the rest into Wasabi?
Okay, so good question. So in that instance, you can restore direct from a cloud tier, leveraging our direct restore feature. So you can do a direct restore into Microsoft Azure, you can do a direct restore into EC2, or in the instance of a provider VCSP, kind of like Probax, they have the option to work with you directly if you're going into their environment with the possibility of restoring into maybe a DR site of theirs. As far as the example where you're saying if you have 30 days of anything older than 30 days, going to cloud tier, and let's say the disaster happens and today and you want yesterday's backups to be restored, the earliest backup that would be in the cloud tier would be something 30 days old. So that in that instance, that's why it's good to still do backup copy jobs to a VCSP. Just kind of similar to what Kevin was showing in his diagram a minute ago, where you can have backup copy jobs going to him across Cloud Connect for 30 days, and then anything older than that going into Cloud Tier. Kevin, I mean, would you agree with that as well as possible options?
Yeah, I think that's a really good, I guess, how we fit in perfectly with needing to keep the retention like in the fast storage as well as pushing the data up to cloud tier to save money as well. So yeah, that's perfect.
Cool.
Okay, great, thank you. And the next question is going to be coming in for Jim. So Jim, I think we might have a couple for you. Here's one just off the bat though. What percentage of data that is tiered to cloud storage is retrieved in the first 30 to 60 days? And this is from David Boland.
I actually, Dustin would probably have a good opinion on this. I think it really just depends on the backup and recovery strategy and how often the business exercises that function. So to us, once it's stored in there, we don't really have any direct control over how often to get accessed. I mean, and the fact that we don't charge for egress means that the customer isn't impacted from a cost perspective. If they want to retrieve it once a month, once a week, once a year, they're not going to pay any extra for that when they use Wasabi. So Dustin, you want to talk about the frequency of restoral perhaps?
Sure. I would say that from a Veeam standpoint, typically what we see in the field is most people do their most of their restores within 7 days. And then typically after that, the restore operations go down pretty dramatically on anything older. But it does depend on the use case or the person. Sometimes compliance reasons they do restores a little bit more frequently for older backups. But by far, typically within a couple of days, up to 7 days, you see people doing restorations, and then anything older than that is usually fine to go to Wasabi or a cloud storage.
Great, thank you. And Kevin, this one's for you, and this is from David as well. Will Probax have an office in EMEA soon?
Yeah, I mean, we've been expanding quite a lot, especially in the past couple of years, and it is something that we've been looking at. As I was saying before, with our data storage, it's all based on demand. So, yeah, the more people that ask for it there, the sooner we'll get it.
So Kevin, you're just looking for a reason to tell them to give you a reason to move to EMEA?
No, give me a reason, yeah. Although I've only just moved to America, and I do like it here. So. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, Dustin, I've got another one for you. What product and software release from Veeam do I need to have, and what are the prerequisites?
Good question.
As well.
Okay, so the product would be version 9.5 update 4, which is the current version. The current version actually is update 4A, but version 9.5 update 4 and newer has Cloud Tier. And what you would need to install would be, of course, Veeam backup and replication, and then you would need a scale-out backup repository. But all of those are features kind of built into Veeam backup and replication, and you would need a Enterprise or Enterprise Plus license.
Great, thank you. All right, we're looking for our next question here. Bear with me.
Actually, Dustin, there's probably a few on the chat question window that you could probably pick off that are kind of Veeam specific.
Sure, let me look through there real quick. Let's see one from David Boland. Is the data encrypted at transit and at rest between Veeam and Wasabi?
I already took care of that one. You got to pick. Okay. You got to pick a harder one. Those are
the easy ones. All right. The answer for that one's yes.
Yeah. So I know David Boland was asking about. It says if I have EMC Pure or NetApp primary storage on-prem, can I back up to Veeam backup and recovery and for Wasabi? So I think it's a different scenario than perhaps it's about getting that on-prem storage into the Veeam environment, and how would you do it?
Sure. See, and there's also tagging onto it. It looks like it would be a lot less expensive for my on-prem costs if I could move cold data off my flash and onto object. So yeah, I mean that use case that you're describing there, David, is exactly what it was intended for. So how the cloud tier works is it has to land on-prem first. So it has to land on whatever repo you're using. So if your primary repo is data domain or Pure or whatever, it's going to land on that first, and then those two tiering conditions have to be met. One, it has to be older than whatever days that you set for it to be tiered off, and that chain has to be closed, meaning it has to be a newer full backup. So if it's landing, let's say, for example, you mentioned Pure, so if it's landing on your Pure and it's older than you set it for 7 days old and it's older than that and another full backup has been made, then yes, it's going to tier that data off to Wasabi, and that's exactly what it was meant to do. So you can keep it longer term on, as you mentioned, the cold data kind of longer term on Wasabi, cut down your cost on your Pure storage array there, and use it for what it's meant to be used for, and not taking up a lot of space with old backups.
And Dustin, I think there was another good question from Robert C. He asked if I have data archived to object and I want to basically move that back to a local repository. So I'm almost thinking there the individual is asking about whether he can do a restore directly out of Wasabi. So I know that comes up a little bit. Can you comment on that one?
Sure. So that's a good question. Let me see if I can point back to. Actually, I'll point back to this. So this is where I was referring to. This is a kind of an example of restoring back out of Wasabi. So all this data over here are the blocks. Actually, let me pull up this one. This one's a little bit easier to look at. So, everything here, you can see this is capacity tier. So everything here would be living in Wasabi. Everything here would be on-prem. So in the event of doing a restore, whether that be on-prem or wherever, we're only going to pull back the blocks that we need out of Wasabi. So there's always going to be data blocks that are duplicate and on-prem and other backups, just because of the nature of when you take, even if you take 2 full backups, you may have 10 terabytes each, but they're really using maybe a 500 gigs extras, or new data, or in between the two. So what we're going to do is we're going to look for wherever the blocks are closest to where we're trying to restore, and then only pull back the only block that we need out of object. So good question.
I think another good question, perhaps a little bit similar, is one of the first ones that came in from Christian G. He was asking about, can you restore into the cloud if local NAS has been damaged? How do we restore to the most current backup, and that sort of thing? So maybe comment on that one. Yeah,
that's one of the ones we answered kind of at first. So, anything older than or anything newer than, if you set, for example, let's say we set the cloud tier to be 30 days. Anything newer than 30 days old would be lost in that scenario, unless you're doing a backup copy into like a cloud VCSP like Probax, and sending that backup copy there. So it's a good thing to think about when you're talking or setting up your backup job or your backup strategy for object. Is if I'm setting it for 7 days, there's a period of time there where I won't be covered in the event of a disaster. So I need to think about those kind of things.
Especially when that's when you're most likely need the restore done.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Great job, fellas. What I might say is, for the folks that we haven't gotten to in the chat window, we'll be sure and follow up with you after our webinar today.
Sure. So I see another one. It looks like Andy's asking if I don't have a server or it failed, can I restore Wasabi directly to Azure if my local data center is down? So to answer that question, the answer is yes. But what you would need to do is install a Veeam server, and that could be running in Azure. And then you would connect it to the Wasabi object bucket, and then do a direct restore into Azure. So the capability is there. You would just need to install a Veeam server, of course, to connect to that bucket.
And I think, Dustin, if you're game to take one last one, I think there was one that says, does Veeam require scale out storage on-prem in order to do copy to the cloud? So.
Sure, and saying he has a customer that has a small on-site infrastructure with no local storage for a repository, so they want to back up directly to cloud. So I'm kind of torn with this. You do need what we refer to as performance, a performance tier or some sort of local storage. What I will say is that you can use, storage that's located in Azure, or you can use a block level storage somewhere. But I typically don't recommend it because you're getting into network latency issues and things like that. And like we mentioned before, most of your restoration jobs are going to be done within the first 7 days. So the reason why we, are backing up to what we call a performance tier on-prem is that it's for the efficiency and the speed of those restores. And even though Wasabi doesn't charge for egress and API, we're trying to reduce the amount of work that you have to do out of object. So I would recommend, at least some sort of small on-prem, whether it be a day or two worth of backups prior to tiering it off to object. But good question. So, Carrie, it looks like we have some more questions, but what we'll do is we'll answer those, I guess, after the webinar, and then make sure that those get replied out to who answered those.
Absolutely, will do. Everyone, thank you so much for your time today and for joining, and special thanks to our speakers, Dustin, Jim, and Kevin. So we'll be sending out the link and the slides early next week. So thanks again for your time, and we look forward to hearing from you. Bye-bye.